I still remember the crunch of gravel under my tires the first day I drove up to my lake cabin. The air sharp with the scent of pine and wet earth, the sky a pale blue mirrored on the still water. For years, I had dreamed about a place like this. A retreat. A home I could escape to. Something that belonged to me. Not a landlord. Not a company. Not a bank breathing down my neck. Just mine. I had worked extra hours, saved every penny I could, and when I finally signed the papers, it felt like freedom. My cabin wasn't much to look at: old logs, weathered porch, a dock that leaned slightly to one side. But to me, it was heaven. I parked my truck, stepped out, and just stood there for a moment, letting the peace sink in. No traffic, no sirens, no endless noise of city life. Just the hush of wind through trees, the occasional splash from the lake, the creak of the dock swaying on its posts. I thought, this is it. This is home. I grabbed the first box from the back of my truck, heavy with books and tools, and started up the porch steps. I hadn't even set it down inside when I heard the sound of tires on gravel again. Not the easy roll of a neighbor coming to say hello. This was sharp, deliberate. A spotless white SUV pulled up, polished so clean it seemed allergic to dust. And out stepped the woman who would turn my peaceful dream into a war zone. Karen. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't smile. She looked at me like I was an intruder on my own land. Her sunglasses covered half her face, her hair was sprayed into a helmet, and her mouth was set in a line so tight it could have cut glass. She marched up my driveway with a clipboard clutched in her hands like a weapon. "Excuse me," she barked, as though I were a trespasser. "What exactly do you think you're doing here?" I shifted the box in my arms, confused. Moving in, her head tilted, lips pursing even tighter. "This cabin falls under the Lakeshore Homeowners Association, and as president, I have to inform you that you're already in violation." I laughed, thinking she had to be joking. "Violation? I've been here 10 minutes. She started listing things off like she'd been preparing a speech. "Your truck is improperly parked. Your dock has not been inspected and approved by the HOA Safety Committee. And I don't see any exterior paint approval forms filed." That's 3 violations already. I stared at her, trying to process the insanity. "Lady, this is my property. My land. My cabin. I don't recall signing up for any HOA." Her smile was cold. "Everyone who lives here is part of the HOA, whether they like it or not." She tapped her clipboard. "I'll be in touch." Then she spun on her heel, marched back to her SUV, and drove off, spraying gravel in her wake. I shook my head and carried my box inside, figuring she was just another nosy neighbor with too much free time. But that night, when I came back from a quick grocery run, I found a bright yellow notice taped to my door. HOA violation. My crimes, according to Karen's paperwork: unapproved exterior appearance, failure to pay initiation fees, and illegal storage of materials. The fine? $500. I laughed again, louder this time, crumpled the paper, tossed it. "Not my problem," I muttered. But the next morning, the problem showed up in uniform. A sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway, and standing right beside it, smug as a cat bringing home a dead bird, was Karen. The deputy tipped his hat. "Morning. We got a call about a disturbance. Something about unauthorized occupancy." Karen jumped in before I could even open my mouth. "This man is trespassing. He refuses to pay HOA dues, refuses to comply with safety codes, and is endangering the entire community. I demand he be removed immediately." The deputy turned to me. "You got proof you own this place?" I pulled the deed from my glove box, handed it over. "Right here. My name's on it. I bought it fair and square." The deputy looked it over, then back at Karen. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. We can't remove someone from their own property." Karen's face turned red. But he's in violation. Look at the list." She shoved her clipboard at the deputy like it was a badge of authority. The deputy sighed. "Take it up in civil court. My hands are tied." He gave me back my deed, tipped his hat again, and drove off. Karen stood frozen, her face twisted in rage. Before leaving, she pointed a manicured finger at me and hissed, "You'll regret this." That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor. This was war. From that day on, the harassment began in earnest. Every morning, I'd find another notice slipped under my door or taped to my truck. The fines escalated, 500, then 700, then 1,000, each one more ridiculous than the last. I ignored them, but she didn't stop. One morning, I woke up to find trash scattered across my yard, bags ripped open, garbage spilling everywhere. Another day, nails appeared in the gravel right where my truck tires would roll. Once, when I came home from town, I found my dock rope cut clean through, my small boat drifting out into the lake. I confronted her about it once. She was pruning roses in her front yard, her SUV gleaming in the driveway. "Karen," I called. She looked up, unfazed, clippers snapping shut with a metallic click. "Somebody cut my dock rope last night," I said, walking closer. Boat nearly drifted to the other side of the lake. She didn't even blink. Maybe if you paid your dues, the HOA Safety Committee would be more inclined to. Protect your property. My jaw clenched. "Are you threatening me?" She smiled sweetly, the kind of smile that hides teeth. "Just stating facts." Then she turned her back and kept pruning. That night, sitting on my porch with a cold beer, I stared out at the lake and thought about how badly she wanted me gone. And I asked myself why. It wasn't just about dues, it wasn't just about rules. She had some kind of hold on this community, and I had broken it simply by existing outside her control. I don't back down easily. And if Karen wanted to fight, I was ready to dig in. THE days turned into weeks, and each one brought some new stunt from Karen. I started to realize she wasn't just acting alone. She had the neighborhood on a string. At first, people waved at me, curious about the new guy by the lake. But after a few weeks of Karen's whisper campaign, those friendly waves turned into glares. One neighbor, an older man who lived 2 doors down, stopped by when I was chopping wood and muttered, "You'd better just pay her, son. Makes life easier." Then he looked around nervously, as though Karen herself might be listening from the trees, and hurried away. Another time, I was walking into town for supplies when a woman at the general store deliberately turned her cart into the next aisle just to avoid me. Whispers followed me. "That's the guy. Karen said he refuses to follow the rules." What a troublemaker. It wasn't just about me anymore. Karen was poisoning the well, turning neighbors into informants, allies into spies. And the worst part? She had an endless supply of time and energy to dedicate to making my life miserable. One morning, I woke up to the sound of pounding. Not at my door, but on the side of my cabin. When I ran outside, I found a giant condemned sign nailed across my porch. My blood boiled. That was the last straw. I drove straight into town, found the county records office, and started digging. If Karen wanted to play games, I was going to play harder. Hours turned into days, but I uncovered things she probably never thought anyone would look for. The HOA, it turned out, had been formed years ago under sketchy circumstances. Not everyone had agreed, but Karen had pushed paperwork through, convincing the county she had unanimous consent. She'd been collecting dues for years, thousands upon thousands of dollars, but I couldn't find a single record of where the money went. No community improvements, no road repairs, no park maintenance. Just fines, fees, and Karen's signature at the bottom of every notice. Then I found the gold mine. The road. The main road that wound around the lake, paved, maintained, used by every single homeowner, wasn't actually HOA property. According to the maps I pulled, it technically fell into a private parcel of land that had gone tax delinquent years ago. Meaning, if I played my cards right, I could buy it. The thought made me grin for the first time in weeks. I contacted the county, filed the right forms, paid what they asked. Within a month, I had the deed in my hands. I didn't just own my cabin anymore. I owned the road. And Karen's pristine white SUV had no other way to reach her driveway except through it. I didn't gloat at first. I didn't wave the papers in her face. I bided my time. But Karen couldn't leave me alone. She filed a lawsuit against me through the HOA, demanding I pay back dues, late fees, and damages for not maintaining my property according to her standards. She wanted $25,000. I laughed when I got the summons, because what she didn't know was that I had already prepared my counterattack. The day of court arrived, and I'll admit, I was nervous. I wasn't used to standing in front of judges, wearing a suit that felt too stiff and shoes that pinched. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she was in her element. She strutted into that courtroom in a tailored jacket, pearls gleaming, her lawyer at her side. She barely glanced at me. Her lips curled into that same cold smile. When her lawyer spoke, it was with all the confidence of a man who thought he had the case locked. "Your Honor, this defendant has repeatedly violated the HOA bylaws, refused to pay required dues, and has created a nuisance to the community. We are seeking damages in the amount of $25,000 plus legal fees." Karen nodded along, smirking, like she could already taste victory. Then it was my turn. I stood, hands a little shaky at first, but my voice steadied as I went. I told the judge everything. How I had moved in peacefully. How Karen had harassed me, sabotaged my property, spread lies. I handed over copies of every bogus fine she'd posted. I showed photos of the nails scattered on my driveway, the cut rope, the trash dumped on my lawn. And then I pulled out the deed. "Your Honor," I said, my voice louder now, stronger. "This case isn't about dues. It's about control. The HOA, under Ms. Karen's leadership, has been illegally collecting money for years. And while she claims authority over me, the truth is she has no authority at all. In fact, I handed the judge the papers. I now own the main road that provides access to the entire HOA, including Ms. Karen's house." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, even a laugh or two. Karen's face drained of color, then flushed red. She stammered, That's impossible. You can't." But the judge silenced her with a sharp rap of the gavel. He read over the deed, then looked at Karen with a frown. "It appears the defendant is correct. This road is legally his property." Karen's lawyer tried to recover, but it was no use. The judge dismissed her case entirely and turned the tables. Given the evidence of harassment presented here, this court is considering sanctions against the HOA for abuse of authority. Karen sank into her chair, trembling with rage, but she couldn't say a word. When the gavel came down for the last time, I walked out of that courtroom with my head high. From that day forward, everything changed. Neighbors who once glared at me started waving again, some even apologizing for believing Karen's lies. Without her power, the HOA crumbled. And the best part? Every time Karen drove her gleaming SUV home, she had to roll down the road I owned. Sometimes I sit on my porch at sunset, watching the lake shimmer gold, and I hear the crunch of tires on gravel. I smile to myself, knowing Karen can't touch me anymore. She called the cops on me, tried to ruin my life, and now, every single day, she has to drive across my land just to get to her house. Funny how life works out. A little while after that first courtroom win, I thought it was over. I really believed Karen would lick her wounds, accept defeat, and just leave me alone. But I should have known better. People like Karen don't stop, they regroup. It started small again. Petty, almost childish things. I'd find HOA newsletters crumpled and stuffed in my mailbox, each one painting me as the villain of the community. According to Karen, I was abusing a loophole in the law, undermining neighborhood unity, and harboring hostility toward my neighbors. She wrote it all in that clipped, official language, but I could hear her venom in every word. Then came the neighborhood watch. Suddenly, I'd see people walking their dogs at odd hours, always circling past my cabin. They weren't watching for burglars or coyotes. They were watching me, taking notes, reporting back. One night, I was woken by the sound of voices outside. I slipped quietly onto the porch and listened. Two of my neighbors stood by the edge of my property, whispering. "Karen says he'll cave eventually. No one stands up to her this long." "Yeah, but what about the road thing?" "She can't fight that. She'll find a way. She always does." I wanted to shout at them, But instead, I just stayed in the shadows, realizing how deep Karen's hooks went. The next morning, I discovered someone had spray-painted hose scab across the side of my woodpile. My hands trembled as I scrubbed at it, fury bubbling inside me. This wasn't just Karen anymore. She had turned the neighborhood into her personal army. But I wasn't about to break. Instead, I doubled down. I spent late nights combing through more HOA records, finding every inconsistency, every shady decision Karen had made over the years. It was like peeling back layers of rot. She'd been fining people left and right for the tiniest things: grass too long, shutters the wrong color, a car parked at the wrong angle. Thousands of dollars, all flowing into the HOA account. But then, poof, no paper trail, no receipts, no improvements. I started to suspect what I'd find. And sure enough, when I dug deeper into county permits and tax filings, it all pointed to one thing. Karen had been funneling home money into her own projects. Private contractors for community repairs that were actually renovations on her house. Landscaping fees that matched the design of her backyard garden. Even a line item for lake preservation that suspiciously matched the invoice from the company that had just installed her new dock. It was fraud. Plain and simple. I knew if I took that to court, she'd be finished. But I also knew she wouldn't go down without one last fight. And I was right. A week later, I came home to find a certified letter waiting for me. Karen was suing me again. This time, not just for unpaid dues, but for damages to the reputation of the HOA and interference with community governance. She wanted $50,000 now. I laughed when I read it, but there was a knot in my stomach too. Court was one thing, but Karen had influence. Friends in high places. And if she could spin this the right way, maybe she thought she could bury me under legal fees, even if she lost. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my porch, listening to the frogs croak by the water, staring at the moonlit lake. This cabin had been my dream, my refuge. And here I was, locked in a war with a woman who couldn't stand to see someone live free from her control. I thought about giving up, selling the place, walking away, starting fresh somewhere else. But then I remembered the look on Karen's face the day the judge had thrown out her first case. That mix of shock and rage, of power slipping through her fingers. And I knew I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, I walked into court armed with more evidence than she could imagine. Karen came dressed like she was attending a gala, dripping with jewelry, her lawyer at her side. She didn't even look nervous. She looked smug. Her lawyer went first, spinning a story so elaborate you'd think I was some sort of criminal mastermind. According to him, I was a disruptive element, a danger to community stability, and a hostile landowner deliberately exploiting technicalities to harass good, law-abiding residents. He painted me as the bad guy, and some people in the gallery nodded along. Then it was my turn. I took a deep breath, stood tall, and began. I told the court everything, again, but this time I went further. I laid out the financial records, the mismatched invoices, the missing funds. I showed how Karen had turned the HOA into her personal piggy bank. I presented signed statements from a couple of brave neighbors who had finally come forward, tired of her bullying. And then I dropped the bombshell, a certified forensic accountant's report I'd commissioned, showing years of embezzlement. Tens of thousands of dollars siphoned away. The courtroom went silent. You could hear the shuffle of papers, the clearing of a throat, but nothing else. Karen's face turned pale. She started whispering furiously to her lawyer, but the damage was done. When the judge finally spoke, his words felt like thunder. This court finds that under Ms. Karen's leadership has engaged in fraudulent and abusive practices. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed in full. Furthermore, this court orders an independent audit of the HOA's finances and refers this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. Karen gasped. "No, you can't. This is my community. I built it." The judge slammed his gavel. "Order. Ms. Karen, you built nothing. You abused your position for personal gain, and you will answer for it." The gallery erupted again. Some neighbors looked shocked. Others looked relieved. A few even clapped quietly until the bailiff told them to stop. As for me, I walked out of that courthouse with the sun on my face and a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had won. But the best part? Watching Karen slink out behind me, her empire crumbling, her neighbors no longer afraid but disgusted. She had spent years ruling over them with fear. Now they saw her for what she really was. And every day since, as I sit on my porch with the lake breeze in my hair, I hear the sound of her SUV struggling up the road I own, and I smile. Because no matter how much she fights, no matter how much she fumes, she'll never escape the fact that to get home, she has to drive across my land. And that, I think, is justice. For a little while after that last court battle, life settled into something that almost felt normal. The air by the lake was sweet again. I'd sip coffee on the porch, watch the sun rise across the water, and let the sound of the loons echo out into the morning. For the first time in months, I could breathe. But I should have known Karen wasn't finished. People like her don't just give up when they lose. They fester. They scheme. And soon enough, the piece I had started to rebuild was shattered all over again. It began with the road that cut across my property, the one that led straight to Karen's house. The irony was never lost on me. The queen of the Ho had to pass over land she didn't control just to get to her throne. For weeks, she drove past with her chin high, refusing to look my way, pretending like I didn't exist. Then one morning, I woke to the sound of pounding. At first, I thought it was construction noise from down the lake, but when I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. Karen had hired workers, 3 men in neon vests with a rented backhoe, and they were digging right into the middle of the road on my land. I stormed down barefoot, heart hammering. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen stood there with her arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her nose like a general inspecting her troops. "Road repairs," she said smoothly. "The Ho has determined this section needs reinforcement." "On my property?" I shouted. "You don't have the right to touch this land." She smirked. "Actually, I do. As Ho president, I have the authority to maintain community access routes. This isn't your land. It's our road." I pulled the deed out of my pocket. Yes, I'd taken to carrying it ever since winning the case. I shoved it in her face. "This road belongs to me. You set one more foot on it without permission, and you're trespassing." The workers froze, glancing nervously at each other. One of them muttered something about not wanting to get arrested. Karen barked at them to keep working, but they hesitated. Finally, grumbling, they shut down the backhoe and left her standing there fuming. That was the first battle, but not the last. A week later, I came home to find 2 orange traffic cones and a big wooden sign blocking the road. The sign read, "Private, Ho members only. Trespassers will be fined." I laughed so hard I nearly doubled over. Fined? By who? Her? But it wasn't funny when I realized she was dead serious. She started holding Ho meetings about me, circulating flyers that called me a rogue landowner and warning the community that I was jeopardizing property values. And people came. Not everyone, but enough. She rallied her loyalists, those who either feared her wrath or still believed in her little empire. Suddenly, I wasn't just fighting Karen. I was fighting a mob. One night, a caravan of cars parked along the road outside my cabin. I peeked out from the window as 30 or 40 neighbors gathered with flashlights, chanting slogans Karen had clearly fed them. "Protect the Ho. Save our homes." They stood there shouting into the night, their voices carrying across the water. It wasn't just noise. It was intimidation. I clenched my fists, fury burning through me, but I didn't step outside. That's exactly what she wanted, for me to snap, to do something reckless she could twist into her next lawsuit. So I waited. The next morning, I started making calls. County zoning office, sheriff's department, even the fire marshal. I explained what was happening, how Karen was staging unauthorized gatherings, blocking emergency access with her cones and signs, even attempting unauthorized construction. Each department took notes, and though they sounded skeptical, I knew I had planted seeds. Still, Karen didn't stop. She escalated. One afternoon, I was driving back from town when I saw her SUV parked sideways across the road, blocking my path. She was standing outside, hands on her hips, like a toll booth operator. "You can't pass," she said flatly. I rolled down my window. "Move your car, Karen. Not until you agree to sign this." She held up a document. "It's a revised covenant, restoring HOA authority over the road. If you sign, we can all go back to normal." I laughed bitterly. "Normal? You mean back under your thumb? Forget it." She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a venomous hiss. "You think you've won, but you haven't. Everyone in this community hates you. You're an outsider, a parasite, and I will make sure you regret ever moving here." I stared at her for a long moment, then slowly pulled out my phone. "Move the car, or I'll call the sheriff right now." She must have seen I wasn't bluffing because after a tense pause, she slid back into her SUV and sped off, tires spitting gravel. That was the moment I knew. Karen wasn't just fighting for control. She was spiraling. She couldn't accept that she was beaten, and that made her dangerous. Sure enough, a few days later, a deputy knocked on my door. Someone had filed a complaint accusing me of blocking community access, harassing neighbors, even making threats. The deputy was polite, but firm. He had to investigate. I handed him my deed, the court rulings, even the videos I'd started recording of Karen's antics. By the time he left, he shook his head and muttered, "Sounds like you've got yourself a real piece of work here." But I wasn't laughing anymore, because Karen had crossed the line from nuisance to menace. I gathered everything, every flyer, every photo, every recording of her harassment. I filed for a restraining order. And this time, when we went back to court, I didn't just go after Karen. I went after the hoe itself. The trial was longer, uglier than anything before. Karen came in spitting venom, trying to turn the judge against me. She accused me of being violent, unstable, even mentally ill. She paraded her loyalists onto the stand, each one parroting her lies. But when it was my turn, I laid it all out. The fraudulent finances, the harassment campaigns, the mob gatherings, the attempted road seizure. I played videos of her shouting, threatening, blocking my way. I showed emails she'd sent to neighbors, calling me a plague and urging them to make his life unbearable until he leaves. And then I delivered the final blow. A statement from the sheriff's office confirming that all complaints against me were baseless and that Karen herself was under investigation for misuse of HOA funds and harassment. The courtroom erupted. Karen went red as a beet, screaming at the judge, at her lawyer, at anyone who would listen. But it was too late. The gavel came down. Hard. The judge dissolved the HOA permanently. He appointed a trustee to oversee the redistribution of remaining funds. And he granted me a permanent injunction against Karen, barring her from setting foot on my land or attempting to exercise authority she no longer had. As for Karen herself, well, the DA took the embezzlement evidence seriously. Within weeks, word spread that she was facing criminal charges: fraud, misappropriation of funds, harassment. The Queen had lost her crown, and now she was headed for a cell. The night I heard the news, I sat on my porch, listening to the crickets hum, and the lake lap gently at the shore. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no shouting, no flyers, no angry mobs, just peace. And then headlights appeared in the distance. Karen's SUV crawling down the road. She slowed as she reached the stretch that crossed my property. For a moment, she just sat there, engine idling, trapped in the reality she'd created. To get home, she still had to cross my land, my road. I lifted my coffee mug in a silent toast, even though she couldn't see me. Then, with a squeal of tires, she sped off into the night. That was the last time I ever saw her. Now, every morning, I wake up to the sound of loons on the lake. The cabin is mine. The peace is mine. The road is mine. And Karen? Karen is just a ghost story the neighbors whisper about, a cautionary tale of how power can corrupt, and how one man with enough stubbornness can bring down a tyrant. As for me, I never set out to be a hero. I just wanted a quiet life by the lake. But if this whole nightmare taught me anything, it's this. Sometimes the fight comes to you, and when it does, you stand your ground. Because in the end, freedom isn't given, it's defended. And now the road to Karen's house will forever be a reminder of that.